What's going on, guys? This is Rob. If you guys enjoy my content, make sure you hit the subscribe button and make sure you hit that little bell so you never miss out on my sexy voice. Oh my God, Dan Slott. You beautiful, wonderful man and your fantastic beard. You guys know we had to cover this. It's Fantastic Four #1. It's been a long time since we got like a tried and true Fantastic Four #1, which is to say the Fantastic Four returning. I mean, we got it in like the 90s when the team sucked. But pretty much everybody but the X-Men sucked back in the 1990s. And even the X-Men kind of sucked a little bit. It was a rough time for Marvel with the near comic bust. Like it was pretty rough. Anyway, the Fantastic Four are returning. Now, for those of you guys who are not familiar with Marvel Comics, this is how we know Disney got the X-Men and Fantastic Four. Because they came back. The original decision by Marvel Comics, if the rumors are to be believed in various interviews and so on, is that it all basically came down to the brass at the top of Marvel saying, cancel the Fantastic Four. If Fox is not going to give us the rights back, or they're not going to let us use the characters, then we'll make everyone suffer. And the result was that there was a litany of fan backlash, rightfully so, because the Fantastic Four were the original first family of Marvel. That's why they're so important. They were Marvel's real foray, like real first foray into the comic book landscape. I mean, to really, when you had Martin Goodman and all those guys, and it was like, okay, let's turn the Marvel Comics, the comic book side, into like an actual publishing side, something that we can really do something with. And you had Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko. You had these guys who basically jumped up on the scene and just started cranking out comic book characters like hotcakes. Then like the Fantastic Four was the first real attempt, and that was their answer to the Justice League. And it was huge. Like people love the Fantastic Four because they bickered and they argued and they fought. You didn't really have your traditional superhero dynamic that you saw in the Justice League, where it's like, hey, we're all friends and we just go do things that friends do because we're friends and that's what we do. It wasn't like that. The Fantastic Four would argue with one another and they would have family squabbles. And so because they were so popular, when Marvel wanted to introduce a new character or team, they threw them in the Fantastic Four. Black Panther originally appeared in the Fantastic Four. The X-Men crossover with the Fantastic Four. Spider-Man #1, Peter went to the Fantastic Four, tried to join the team and got turned down. The Inhumans debuted in the Fantastic Four. That's the way a lot of these things played out. And so when you look at these different things, the Fantastic Four really kind of like built the foundation of what became Marvel Comics. And so to see them just abruptly end over a pissing contest was really irritating, for a lot of different fans. And so seeing this return, it's pretty awesome. And Dan Slott, dude, man, let me tell you something, man, the way Dan Slott wrote this is amazing. I was a fan of Dan Slott's full run of Spider-Man. I did recognize that it was time to let somebody else take over the reins, if for no other reason than the fact that Dan Slott's writing style is pretty distinctive. And so because of that, I always enjoyed the whole thing. But to see Dan Slott take over the Fantastic Four, I think it's going to be pretty awesome. Like I'm pretty excited about it because I'm anxious to see where he goes with it. Now, initially this kind of picks up, well, it's actually pretty interesting. It picks up really with like classic Fantastic Four, which is to say Alicia Masters and Wyatt Wingfoot. Now, when I say classic Fantastic Four, the reason why I say that is because these are just two old school characters. For the character of Wyatt Wingfoot, he originally made his debut in Marvel Comics in like Fantastic Four #50, and then Alicia Masters showed up 16 issues later in issue #66. But it's one of these funny situations because when you're talking about like the Fantastic Four mythos, these are characters that we haven't really heard of for a long time. Alicia Masters, we've definitely seen and heard from, but with regards to Wyatt Wingfoot, he's kind of been missing in action for a while. Now, this isn't really anything of any real consequence because Wyatt Wingfoot was really nothing more than like a cheerleader for the Fantastic Four, and he banged She-Hulk for a while, and that was about it. I mean, that was really the only thing he ever really did. So it's kind of cool when you look at the character for what it is, but it still serves its purpose. Now, in the middle of all this, a flare pops up, and it's like the return of the Fantastic Four. And when I initially saw this, I was like, well, that's a little lackluster. Like, this is how the Fantastic Four comes back in the first 5 pages with a flare shot into the air. Like, that seems kind of lame, but it's funny because the way that Dan Slott does this is one of the reasons why Dan Slott writing, like when he transitions from one title to the next, is usually pretty seamless, because what he does is basically pick up on Marvel 2-in-1 by Chip Zdarsky. Now, the problem with this is that Marvel 2-in-1 is one arc in like 3 issues in, and so really the run hasn't been fleshed out yet. What I'm afraid of is that the return of the Fantastic Four will basically kill off interest in Marvel 2-in-1, because the whole basis behind the Marvel 2-in-1 story, it was the journey of Ben Grimm and Johnny Storm to find the Fantastic Four, which, given the nature of this story, obviously they didn't locate them. So it's kind of like, okay, I mean, we know how that story ends. It was like when Marvel released All New, All Different Marvel after before Secret Wars ended, and so we basically knew how things were going to end before the story even completely unfolded. In reality, I think a lot of this was done to capitalize on what will be, or we'll soon see, information being dumped saying, hey, look, here's what we're going to do with the Fantastic Four and all that kind of good stuff. Or at the very least, build on the news and the various rumors and so on and so forth. I'm not against it. I'm excited to see the Fantastic Four return. I'm just kind of worried that it's going to kill off interest in Marvel 2-in-1. But we know that that was the whole basis behind the story. But the way that Dan Slott plays on this is that throughout the entire Marvel 2-in-1 arc, at least that we've seen so far, and really ever since the events of All New, All Different Marvel, which is to say The Amazing Spider-Man, when Dan Slott was writing it, Johnny Storm's character was constantly struggling with the idea that the Fantastic Four didn't exist anymore. And it's one of the funny things that consistently has been played on ever since the Fantastic Four ended, is that if there is no team, then Johnny Storm has no real place. And so it works, because it was really kind of a way to focus on the nature of his character absent the actual Fantastic Four team. And so in this moment, it makes sense that he would jump in excitement and race off to the Baxter building expecting to see the team there. The issue with this is that Ben Grimm knows that's not the case. And this has been the other side of Ben that we haven't really seen before. By and large, Ben Grimm has been one of two characters in the Fantastic Four mythos. He's either been the strong guy, the big lumbering strong guy, basically the heavy hitter for the team, or he's been kind of like their emotional backbone, right? Like when no one else seems to be able to go on, Ben Grimm, the Thing, is like, hey guys, we got this, and just kind of continues pushing everybody in this direction. Now, Marvel has focused on him a lot individually, in terms of like story arcs that centered on him outside of the Fantastic Four line of stories. For example, Civil War saw him taking off to France for some reason, which was kind of weird. And so when you're talking about this whole thing, Ben sort of showing this other side in terms of how he's being written and simply saying like, well, I'm essentially just kind of giving Johnny hope, is a little dark and a little cynical. And that's why it's kind of crazy, because when Johnny shows up to the Baxter building, he finds a couple of Yancey Street gang kids who were just sitting up on the Baxter building and shot the flare into the air. And so it's not one of these things that only Johnny Storm noticed. It was a very exciting moment because the world wanted to see the Fantastic Four return. It's one of those things where the way that Dan Slott writes this is a reflection of the Marvel Comics readers. Even if the Fantastic Four haven't been selling that well for the last 30 years, which they haven't, and even if the Fantastic Four have done a lot of things that have basically gone under the radar, which they have, if they really haven't been a top tier team in the eyes of sales and storytelling for the last few decades, they're still the first family. And so even if people say like the Fantastic Four need to come back, and they would read the first arc and never read it again, there is still kind of a position where the Fantastic Four have to be here, because it's one of those things where the significance of the team in recent years hasn't been in like Hickman and and Mark Miller style storytelling. It's been in the fact that like Tony Stark can't figure something out, so he goes to Reed Richards. Johnny Storm pops up and says, hey Spider-Man, what's going on? I mean, these are things that made the Fantastic Four interesting because they kind of had their life. The Fantastic Four were the equivalent to the guy who's been on the job site for 40 years, so he just kind of does whatever he wants to do, and who the hell's going to tell him no, because he's just been there that damn long. Like, that's what the Fantastic Four are like. And so it's one of these cool situations, because where the news inside this would basically go through and start talking to former members of the Fantastic Four, it becomes interesting. The reason why I say this is because it's not something that I initially expected to see, right? I mean, like, you have Luke Cage, for example, who joined the Fantastic Four in issue number 168, and that ran for about 3 issues or so. You've got Medusa, who joined the Fantastic Four in issue 132, I think it was. Crystal's been a part of a team. She-Hulk was part of the Fantastic Four. She-Hulk being here is basically like, look, I was hired to keep these kids out of jail because essentially Ben Grimm wanted me to, like the Thing wanted me to. And so going in there, like Ben Grimm essentially dropped all charges because for the most part, the Thing wasn't necessarily staged, but at this point, he really kind of seems to have like total detachment, right? Like maybe they'll come back, maybe they won't. I don't know. I don't care. I'm just moping around and being sad. And so he ends up telling this story to what's basically the caretaker, and essentially says, hey, look, here's how all these events unfolded, right? Like there's this secret story of the Fantastic Four. In this instance, it's basically just some chick, some alien chick who's kind of like not really a taxi for the spaceways, but is familiar with the spaceways. The result of this is that they're kind of stuck out there, and not really sure where to go, not really sure what to, how to get back to their own dimension. And so what ends up happening is this chick basically says, so this stone can amplify the resonant frequency of a voice in order to essentially provide you a gateway, provide you a portal back to your dimension. What I need is your best singer. And of course, Susan Storm speaks up and she's like, well, I'm the best singer for the Fantastic Four. And everybody else is like, no, not really. It's actually Johnny Storm. But it's kind of cool because ultimately, like Johnny Storm starts singing, the portal opens, they end up traveling back to the main Marvel Universe dimension, and like he still won't stop singing, which is kind of funny. But it's one of these cool things because what Dan Slott's doing here is it's not just the return of the Fantastic Four, it's moving them in a different direction, or moving them in a forward direction. The Fantastic Four have largely been a stagnant team, which is to say they had progression up until about the late 1960s to about 1968 when essentially when Marvel Comics stopped using definitive points in time. And so like ever since then, the Fantastic Four have just been a team that explores different adventures and charts the spaceways and multiverses, or I guess other universes in and the multiverse and so on and so forth, which is fine. But like Ben Grimm and Alicia Masters have been together for like 40 years. So it's time to like move things forward. And so what Ben Grimm does is go to the home of Alicia Masters and propose. And it's a cool thing to see because, you know, if you're not really a longtime fan of the Fantastic Four, this isn't really relevant to you because in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't really matter. But when you're talking about like, you know, people who have been reading Fantastic Four for like a long time, you know, 20, 30 years, it makes sense. It was kind of one of those things where it's like, yeah, this should have happened a long time ago. Again, Dan Slott is super good at writing like characters, writing like how characters would respond in a given situation. When it comes to this whole thing, Johnny just kind of freaks out, right? Because like Ben's response is, hey, I want you to be my best man. And Johnny's like, no, this is ridiculous. No one should be the best man except for Reed Richards. And that's why I say Dan Slott's so good at writing characters, is because when it comes to like the Fantastic Four, Reed is always the focal point. Like he's always the central hub of the team. When you're talking about all these different things, it makes sense that like given the friendship that Ben and Reed have had, because they've been friends for so long since their college years, it makes sense that like it should be Reed who's the best man of Ben Grimm. And so finally, after all of this, Johnny kind of has to accept the fact that it doesn't seem like the Fantastic Four are going to return, that they're not going to come back, because if they were, they would have been here by now. It's an interesting moment because it's him finally coming to grips with reality. And at this point, we switch over to the Fantastic Four. We switch over to Reed and Susan. And again, this is one of the coolest moments. It's a small little thing that happens. It's a conversation between Reed and Susan. And she asks, are you sure this is going to work? You know, it seems like it's an impossible thing to do. And the question is, do you as my wife believe in me? And she says yes. And he says, that's why I can do the impossible, because you believe that I can. And this is why I love these things so much, because Dan Slott's so good at writing people in relationships. And so what ends up happening is they kind of send out a signal, essentially, shoot out a flare. And it's kind of like, hey, look, we are alive out here and we're coming home. And so it's so cool because the Fantastic Four are finally making their return to Marvel Comics. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this video to an end. If you are new here to Comics Explained, make sure you guys hit the sub button to become part of the Rob Corps. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you drop a like, and I will catch you all later. Peace.